Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerceddecoder.com, and this video is about CSS naming conventions. I'm not a CSS expert by any means. I'm just starting to get into sort of trying to practice more disciplined CSS practices. I've done some videos where I've done like showing you how to do things in CSS, but the reason why you want like some sort of like disciplined naming convention is one, you want to try to avoid collisions with your styles where one style is overriding another and you're not sure why and which one's taking priority. And also make it easier to read what you're doing and understand what you're doing. And there are several different naming conventions out there. I've just had to kind of focus on getting used to using BEM. And most of these naming conventions are kind of like loose guidelines on how you name your classes. So there is some flexibility on sort of how you apply the convention. So first, let's just create like a new folder. So I'm going to create a new folder. We'll call this BEM practice. And in here, I'm going to create a couple new files. New file, index.html, and a style.css. Okay, and in my HTML, I will use Emmet to kick off our HTML file. So there's my boilerplate. I am going to use VS Code to help me out with the CSS. So that's a link tag. And there I go. Okay, so essentially, the way you want to think about BEM is that there's three things to your CSS or to your project. There's blocks, so you have to think of sort of your website in sort of chunks. So in this case, we're going to start with the top. So let's say my first block is called the nav. So I'll have a class, okay, called nav. Okay, so this is my nav block. Okay, and that's where we're going to start. Now, in this, okay, so, and then in this block, I will have, let's have like a little like logo to the side. So we'll say, we'll call that the head. We'll use a header tag for that. And that's where we'll put the logo. So we'll call this logo. And then we're going to have the actual menu, which I'll use the nav tag for. Okay. And then here we'll have a UL tag with several LIs. LI, menu item. Okay, menu. Okay, so we'll add classes as we go. But that's where we start. Okay, so there's going to be my initial sort of HTML. We're going to style the navigation. I'll head over to my CSS. Generally, there's some starter CSS I always use. So this is just personal boilerplate. So I'll just call it that. So you can differentiate that before I start actually using, oh, and I'm using like JavaScript comments, but that's fine. Personal boilerplate. And then let me just comment this out properly. There we go. Oh, that's right. I got all that fun. Let's just do it this way. Personal boilerplate, because I have this like extension called better comments that colors my comments. So depending on how I color them, it ends up applying some weird styles, which is pretty awesome in JavaScript, but when I get to CSS, it's be a little annoying. Boilerplate, there we go. Personal boilerplate. Let me just make that line up a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so there's my personal boilerplate. What I always like to do is first I like to have my root selector so I can declare variables. You don't have to declare variables in the root, but that's just sort of like the proper thing to do. That way I could override the variables if I need to somewhere else. And I always just generally have variables for my colors. So I'll have like primary color. We'll say blue, secondary color. We'll say red, and then I need some semicolons here. And then generally I have some variables for my fonts, so I'll have like my title font, and we'll just use Arial for that. And then we'll have my main font, and we will use just a serif for that. I'm not gonna go hunt around Google Fonts right now. So that's is set. So then what I would do is I want to make sure that all my headings have the title font. So I would do an H1. All right, yeah, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. And I'm going to make sure that the font size, or font family, uses the title font variable. So that way, if I want to change the font for all the titles, and in case there's other titles I define later on, they're all going to have the same font because I'm using the variable. Oh, and also I want to use the all selector. This is like a little mini reset. What I do is I'll just do like margin 0. So that way everything has a margin of 0, padding of 0, and box sizing, border box. So that way basically I'm not worrying about like padding and margin adding to my width and height. It's always included in any predefined heights and width, which just I find easier to work with. Font family, H1, H2, H3, and the last one is going to be the body tag, where I want the main font to be. So again, font family. Var. My throat's a little coarse. Main font. Okay, so that's just sort of like my personal boilerplate that I kind of put into every style every style sheet that I write. Just sets a lot of defaults for me that I can easily tweak afterwards. Now what I'll do is I'll put another comment to block out, and I just like putting in my headings to make my code easier to read. So I'll put another heading for the nav block, because that's going to be our first block. So essentially the first style would be the block, so .nav. Okay, and then here I can style that block, so I can say, hey, you know, I want the nav block to have a display of flex. And actually, let's before we move forward, let's do this. Let's open this up with live server so you can see what we got. And I'll move this over here, and this way we can kind of see as things change. So I'm going to give the nav block a display of flex. Okay, so see, now the reason why you see that is because there's technically two blocks. There's this block, that's like the nav block or nav element, and then this is the header element. Okay. Now I'm going to want them, I want the logo, I want the header element to be all the way on this side, and I want the nav element to be all the way on this side. So I'm going to use justify content, space between. Okay, that pushes them to the farther edges. I don't want them being so scrunched up to the side, so I'm going to give them some padding. So say padding 5 pixels, 10 pixels. Okay, and that gives it a little bit of padding. We can tweak that more later. Okay, cool, and leave it at that for now. Now what I want to do is I want to style these two elements, the header element that's over here, and then the nav element that's over here. So I use my block. Okay, and since I'm going to style a particular element, so this is where we get to block element, I'm going to do 2 underscores and then label the name of the element. So anytime I use the underscores, it means the element. So now we have a class called nav header. It's just another class, but the naming of the class allows me to know exactly what this class is. I'm styling a header element that is within my nav block. Okay, so block element. So what I should do is go add that to my header. Class equals .nav header. Okay. And then I can go back and style it as I wish. So we want to make the font size, we'll say 2 EMs. Okay. Let me just make sure that I put it on the right tag. Yeah. Oh, I put a dot there. That's why. There we go. So nav underscore underscore header is a class. And then let me just make sure that's what I call it over here. Dot nav underscore underscore header. Still not quite applying. Oh, there it goes. I just need to refresh. Okay. And yeah, that's pretty good there. So now we want to do the nav. Okay, so in that case, it would probably be the same. So it'd be class equals nav is the block, and then nav is the element. So it'd be nav nav. Okay, cool. And now we style that. And basically, I want these menu items to be horizontally laid out. So once again, I will do dot nav underscore nav. And what I want this is to be a display flex. And oh no, because the UL's inside there. So is there anything I really want to do with that one? Not necessarily yet. So we'll leave it there, but really what I want to style is the nav is the block, then there's an element called nav, and within that element there's an element called UL. So that's that style. And again, this just allows me to see like the ownership of things. So block, element, element. Anytime you see the two underscores, it means a child element. Okay, so nav 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 UL. I'll just copy that so I don't have to write it out. So I'll put that in the UL. And that I want to be flex. Display flex. And yep, there it goes. It flexed out. Okay. Now I want to style those LIs so that way they're not all scrunched up together like that. But I still want to get rid of the style. What am I looking for? List style. None. Cool. Okay. Now those LIs would be then dot nav underscore UL underscore LI. Okay. So copy that class name. Cool. And then technically I would add that class to each of these. So copy that over. Okie dokie. And then I want those to have like some margin so they're not scrunched up together. So we'll say margin of 5 pixels. Okay. That one has some weird spacing. We'll investigate that a little bit later on. Let's make this font a little bit bigger. Font size, say 1 EM or 1.5 EM. Okay, so that tells me that one of these menus is not inside the nav tag, or I forgot to apply the class to one of them. So let's see here. Class, class, class. They are all inside the UL. They all seem to have the class, 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 class. Let's inspect. Okay, let me get rid of the mobile mode. Okay. And let's take a look at the div. Inside the div, there's the nav. In the nav, there's the UL. And yeah, the last one's not getting the class. Why is that? Class equals nav, UL. Yeah, I just need to refresh. There we go. Yep, this just needed to be refreshed. Okay, menu. Good. Now let's say I want to make a couple of these menus a different color. Okay, so now I want to modify them. So I'm no longer styling a different block per se. I'm now modifying, creating a class to modify the block. Okay, so then that class would then be, so I would start with this because that's the block I'm going to modify. but then the modification will say is color. So then I would use 2 dashes, color. So whenever we use the 2 dashes, that's always a modifier. So then this would be the class. And again, you don't have to, again, how you use this and how you apply it can be different as far as what you consider your blocks. Okay, I might have, probably what I should have done is considered the header and the nav sort of separate blocks in a sense. So then done like nav ul, or actually even just nav, and then use the ul as a block, and then be like ul li or something like that. There's different ways you can do it, but the idea is just to kind of how you organize and how you think through what should you call your class names. So in that case, let's say I want the second one, so I'll add this class on top of it. So hit space, paste the class, and then on the fourth one, space, add the class. Okay, so if I look in here, now see these both have now 2 classes. Well, let me refresh one more time. There you go. So see, 2 of them have the modifier class. So I can kind of see that, okay, this is the block styling, and this is a modifier style because it's the dash dash color. So even if I didn't know what your CSS was, I know what you're styling by looking at the name of the class, and I know that this is particularly to just change a particular color of those. So I can figure, okay, that's the class I need to go find to edit if I wanted to change what color it changes into. So in this case, what I'll do is let's go back to style.css. Let's change this. And we're going to say back color, and I'll use the variable primary color. Okay. What did I have as my primary color? Blue. Okay, let's switch it to red. Am I not selecting the right? Make this a little bit bigger so I can inspect this a little bit. Okay, so let's see here. I'm selecting this right here. So this is the one I styled. LLI. Oh, I see what I did. I put the period in there again. Okie dokie. So let me go back to index.html. Let me just take that period out there, because again, you don't need a period in the HTML. And then there you go. So you see here. But again, I can tell like which is the one, what's the thing that's making it red. So they all share the same styling. The block all shares the same fundamental styling. So the block style should always just be something that's going to be like anything that's kind of in that same situation. So all the LIs that are part of the UL, that are part of the nav, that are part of the nav block, all have the same styling except for the ones that I modified. Okay. And again, the idea is just that 2 underscores just means it's a block. I'm referring to the block. 2 dashes representing a modifier. So I'm making a particular modification to that block. And that's all BEM is. Okay. You know, and then you just kind of think through it there. And again, there's no sort of hard and fast way to do it. I've seen different people do it in slightly different ways. But the idea is that, you know, you're following this naming convention, and basically you're able to look at it and be able to tell sort of like what they're saying. So again, I can say, hey, here we're styling the nav element, or the li element inside the ul element inside the nav element inside the nav block. So basically everything in this anything with the nav at the very top, I know is all going to be part of this nav block that I define here with the nav class. And then once I'm done styling that one, I would then maybe create another block with a different name. Okay, and then, you know, start a new block and work my way there. You do end up making more classes. Okay, and it gets a little bit verbose. But the idea is like finding things in your codes, it's going to be more organized. And when you're talking about a really large project where you're maybe looking through hundreds, if not thousands of styles, tracking down the one style that does the one thing you need to change, written by your colleagues, becomes a lot easier because you're all following sort of the same process, and you kind of know what the class that should do the thing should look like. And again, this is only one possible convention. I know, like in the past, like I will generally stray from using classes altogether, and rely heavily on the semantic tags because I just like the cleaner looking HTML personally. But you know, I am going to try to get in the habit of just using conventions like this a little bit more and trying to be more organized in my classes. And again, I could trim this down a little bit and say, okay, hey, you know what? And again, you just have to take a look at your tree to kind of see how could you trim this down or make this easy to read. I could have just sit there and say, okay, let's give a separate block to this and make this nav its own block, and then given it like a different class name, like menu items, and then done menu items UL. You know, you get creative, but the idea is that it helps you organize and think through how you write your CSS. That's the main purpose. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.